Building a marketing team is a master class in psychology. And guess what marketing is? It's psychology.
You want somebody that's willing to change, willing to roll with the punches, and empower them to always figure out the best way to do the job, because ultimately that's what you want. Like, I want the job done.
Especially if you're listening to this and you're a senior marketer and you're trying to figure out, like, why don't I last long at places, or why don't I get hired? You're probably trying to brute force your lingo into their company.
Everybody wants the magic number. Like, what's the magic number? No, you don't want the magic number. What you want is a bunch of friggin' thinkers.
Welcome to Marketing from the Edge podcast. I'm Cody Alexander. I've directly generated over $200 million in net revenue over the last 5 years through innovative marketing and a numbers-first strategy. Joined with me is my dad. John Alexander has become the go-to expert in the direct marketing field, generating over $1.5 billion in revenue over the last 5 years. Sought by both board of directors and nine-figure businesses, he is an owner/founder of Centurion Publishing and is on the journey of growing this brand new business from 0 to 100 million in annual revenue. Today, we're going to talk about how to build an outstanding marketing team. We share how to onboard a team from the ground up, as well as how to shift an existing team into a winning structure. You'll hear what we look for, how we find both entry-level talent and executive or senior-level marketers, how to build them up, and when to know when it's time to move on. The key to growth is the right people. If you're serious about growing your business, this is a can't-miss episode. So you're in the building process of Centurion, and you're starting from ground zero, right? Which means you're using some existing assets and trying to plug them into the business. You're bringing on new bodies. You're doing all these things. Our company recently went through restructuring, and not what you would think, but not so much of people, but of positions, right? We moved from a franchise model to a centralized model. Everyone's role got redefined, and what numbers were important got redefined. So
really, whether it's franchise to central or central to model XYZ, it doesn't matter. What matters is you have people that were set in roles and in positions, and then most people hate change, and all of a sudden you just interjected a shitload of change into the company.
And both of us are each in this phase of, like, we're kind of building a team, right? And while you're on ground zero, for me, it's taking an existing structure and redefining it. And I think there's a lot of value in both.
Yeah, each one's got its own, tough things, right? The challenge I have is, like, I'm trying to get the flywheel moving, and it takes a lot of energy to start to get the flywheel moving. And yes, this is the 5th time I've done this, right? So yes, I'm trying to inject all the shortcuts I know into getting the flywheel moving. And you try to set unrealistic goals and try to do things like that help.
As much leverage as you can.
That help drive things through. And you use urgency a lot. And I think you use it more and more the more you do this. But that takes one thing, right? Taking a bunch of people that are used to doing it a certain way and all of a sudden switching them around to get them to do it a different way has its own challenges. Well, because now you have this thing flying out of control. Yeah. And now you're like, okay, we got to harness that energy, move it somewhere else and slow it down a little bit and then speed it up.
Yeah, I visualize it like, for you, you've got a little dinghy and you're trying to get that thing going as fast as you can because you got to get past all the wave breaks, right? And once you get out there, like, then you can start to get a little bit better, but like, it's really rough, choppy waters to start with. You just need as much speed as possible. Whereas, like, I'm at the stage where, like, you're on a cruise ship, right? And if you want to move a cruise ship, it takes a lot of coordinated effort and energy to get people to do all of the same things to go in a different direction.
And it's a great example because every time you go to sleep, that cruise ship still moves.
Yeah.
And you got people that are like, oh, let's just turn it back this direction a little bit. Yeah. And then you wake up again and you're like, shit. Like, why are we going that direction again?
Yeah, there's a story of the Navy guy who called up and he's like, turn starboard 6 degrees or whatever. The story goes, he did that because the sun was slightly in his eyes as he was trying to go to bed, and he wanted it out of his eyes. And, while I'm sure that's probably made up, all it takes is one person, slightly inconvenienced, to turn you 6 degrees off course.
Yeah, exactly. We're at 2 different stages, but still trying to accomplish the same thing. I just got back from meeting with the group last week, and it was all about leadership and team building, right? I mean, that's what the almost entire conversations were around, because it is the single biggest thing, you know? And what happens is most businesses, when you get them started and when you start running down a path, you're just trying to make money and you just start bolting shit on and you grab a body from here and that guy is breathing and you plug him into something. And eventually you just have this monstrosity of something, the bigger you get, that you look back and you're like, how the hell did we build this? And it wasn't what you intended to build, right?
Yep.
It just is what happened along the way of all the pieces you picked up. And eventually you've got this thing. The good thing for us is that when you're building out in the first time, you can fix all that stuff, right?
All the things you're like, I would do this differently if I could.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that's what we're doing. And clearly, if you got really good team members and understand how you operate, right? That's one shortcut.
Yeah.
Getting a really good partner that provides resources and value outside of just, hey,
your expertise,
right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely another one. Yeah, but then you just have to have the energy and desire to get the thing going. Most small businesses, and I'll say 10 million and under small business, right? If you ask most business owners if they ever would build the business again today, almost every one of them says no.
Right.
Because they underestimated how friggin' hard it was. The benefit of a guy like me coming in is that I've done this multiple times. And so I don't underestimate how hard it is, but I also know the shortcuts.
Right.
Just like that business owner now knows a lot of shortcuts. The list of things that you would do differently is always longer than the list of things that you're like, hey, let's redo this one.
Yeah, your list of things I did well versus hard lessons learned. And I think the objective here, the goal is, if you're a business owner, how to be intentional about getting the outcome you want without just feeling like you hired a bunch of stupid people.
Yeah, and because the reality is you didn't, right?
No.
Like ultimately, most all the problems in a team originate from the owner.
Yeah.
Or they originate from hiring the wrong person for the team, right? If you're a highly conservative company and you put a bunch of very liberal people into there as employees, number one, they're going to hate it. But number two is they're going to start to inject their thinking and viewpoints into the company.
The truth of the matter is that generally being a leader is having, 50 different skill sets and trying to communicate well each of those skill set. And it's all on a spectrum of like, are you oversharing, right? Like, is this person competent enough and you're sharing to the point of creating micromanagement, or is this person semi-competent, but you're undersharing and so they don't know what to do? Like, the truth of the matter is that building a marketing team is a master class in psychology. And guess what marketing is?
It is.
It's psychology,
So,
right?
Yeah, so you should be lined up. The reality is whether you're building a marketing team or any other team in a business, right? It's the same general things. We'll focus specifically on a marketing team, but there's enough generalities in what we'll talk about that you can do it. So for me, the biggest thing is getting the right culture fit and understanding, even us as a company starting out, right, with 7 and less employees, right, we have a culture that we want to invoke, right? We're not a 9-to-5 environment. We're a do what it takes to get the job done environment. We're a take responsibility environment. We're adult only environment, meaning one of these days I'm going to come up with a better way to say that. But basically, nobody's going to hold your hand and build a to-do list for you.
Right.
Like show up and do the shit that you're supposed to do today. If you need help, say something. Otherwise, they're going to assume you got it and off you go. And you're going to be accountable and held responsible for the end result.
Yeah.
Like how you take the hill, I don't really care too much, right? Just take the damn hill.
Well, it's like the higher up you get in school, the less structure there is, right? When you're in elementary, middle, whatever, you have a lot of structure. In high school, you have a lot of structure and a little say in what you do. And then you get into college and you have a lot of say in what you do and a little structure. And then you go into the workplace and now you have to figure out how you navigate. And I think part of it too is even if you're not a business owner and you're just a marketer, you'll walk away learning, hey, how can I increase my effectiveness in a business? How can I reach that next level, right? And be someone so desirable that leadership will recognize you.
Yeah, and this trip I just got back from, I literally spent 3 hours talking about this stuff. So, we're going to do it on a 20-minute podcast. So we're just going to be able to hit on the highlights, much more surface level. But the reality is you really have to be curious and you got to be willing to dig in. Again, another piece of our culture, right, is the willingness to learn and curiosity. So let's just kind of hit on some of those things right off the bat. First of all, you got to get the right buddies on your team. And how do you do that? And the vast majority of people, and if you've ever been on a job interview, 9 times out of 10, you're interviewing with the manager that you're going to report to.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that human nature in general, most people and most managers will never hire anybody that actually threatens them. Yeah, they'll hire anybody that's good enough, right? As competent as they are, but they're not going to hire that person that's going to take their role. And that's exactly who you want them to hire, is the guy that's going to challenge them and take their role
the core value where we're at is radically curious, right? Like if you truly are radically curious, when someone knows more than you should be able to outlearn them and move up and move on. And so they can take on what you're doing, where you're at, and excel at it. And they have an opportunity to learn, and you can go on and using what you've learned, move on to the next opportunity.
Exactly. And that's how it should work, right? Like your value shouldn't be in the fact that nobody else threatens you and you're the only one that knows how to do something. And if you've got that personality mindset, you need to change it. And you need to make sure those people aren't in your business and decision-making roles, because you'll only ever build a mediocre company, plain and simple.
Yeah. For me, when I'm interviewing someone, there's a couple things I look at, and I think it'd be helpful for you. And I did some hiring before, but when I was working with my dad is when I like really meaningfully scaled up the amount of hiring, and not just hiring, but interviews, right? That I did, and what to look for, what not to look for. So we'll probably have a lot of crossover, but you know, for me, like it's radically curious. It's competitive greatness. Like I want someone who likes to compete and strives for greatness. I want them to want to win so bad. And then third is don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
Like then
amazing, right?
It used to be my fourth, and I'm like, man, this is getting moved up, right? Because you can be curious, you can be, you know, competitive, but if you're an asshole, I don't want to work with you.
Yep, exactly. I say it like in many companies, you can be an asshole and get results, but the second the results fall, the assholes leave. And so the reality is, you know, nobody wants to work with the asshole that doesn't produce, right? Yep. When you have highly competitive, winning personalities, they're like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, you set your ego aside.
Yeah, you set your ego aside. You're like, hey, he gets results. I get it. I can deal with him and work through it. But as soon as that goes away, and everybody goes through ups and downs, so don't be an asshole, get results, because it's easy enough not to be.
Those are the three primary things I look for. And then the fourth one is generally somewhat role specific. Yeah. Right? Like if I'm looking for someone who can manage projects and get big strategic initiatives across the finish line, I want someone who's detail/organized.
Exactly.
You know, if I'm looking for someone who's a strategic thinker, I'm looking for someone who's creative and logical. For me, those are the two in marketing I look for. You can't just be creative because you'll come up with wackadoo ideas, right? You need to be creative and logical and marry the two together. So that way, what you're trying to execute is practical in the business. Generally, the visionary can just be strictly creative and they can dream big without restraints.
Yep.
But when you have someone on your marketing team, you need someone who can come up with an idea that's practical, that's not off the wall. And now all of a sudden they call up and say, let's move 6 degrees to the left because I think we're going to have, you know, YouTube's going to release an update. And you're like, you know, they're steering with their gut and not their head. So yeah, that's like the top three, plus there's some fourth caveat based on the opportunity or the gap we're trying to fill.
Yeah, and I think those are great ones. You know, I mean, obviously I look for nearly the same things. The other side of this is like, how do you find those? And we already talked about the fact that most people manage off their manager. And that's the first thing those guys ask me. They're like, okay, great. I know what to look for, but I'm running the company. How do I make sure all that stuff happens? And for me, everybody's got their own style, right? Their own method. This has always worked really well for me over hundreds and hundreds of hires and interviews, is that initial phone conversation to just kind of keep the crazy out of the building, right? That 20-minute phone conversation where you can tell, because people need to be able to communicate. There's certain roles, right? So you have a screening. You got a first step interview that basically is the manager and somebody else that you trust. And 9 times out of 10, they're a manager of another department. But regardless, it needs to be somebody you trust. Because like we already talked about earlier, human nature is to reject those that threaten you and also only hire those people that are exactly like you. So they mistake the fact that, hey, I have a good rapport with this guy for that he can do the job, or that he's got all those core values. They're like, no, you guys are just think the same way. And then you end up with a company that's not diverse, and non-diverse companies suck.
And not just in the traditional media sense, but of like thinking and personality and skill sets.
Exactly. So to me, those two managers are now on this conversation, right? And they're searching for their own 4 or 5 core values. And ultimately, they got to find out if the person could do the damn role, right? If you need an HTML person that needs to set up and know how to code, is this person going to, if they don't know how to code, are you going to be able to teach them? And if you hire the right people, the ability to do it kind of goes by the wayside in many ways, right? Because most people that have the high level core values can figure out how to get the job done.
Yeah.
But anyways, you still want some semblance of, hey, you don't want a creative type that's going to have to sit all day long and look at Excel and figure out what to do with Excel because it's going to drive them nuts.
Right.
So you need a matched personality.
One thing that's really interesting that is generally not most people's approach in business is that we've always hired entry-level people and coached them up.
Yep.
Right? Like you're looking for someone who's either fresh out of college or out of a similar role in either a lower frequency or lower risk environment. But it's like, hey, this is an opportunity for them to accelerate their growth path.
Exactly. So I like the college thing. I don't give a shit about college. I think it's a wasted metric that too many people friggin' use, right? But the reality is what I'm really after is that somebody that this is their second job, not necessarily their first job, right? The second job people already kind of had one job and now they're looking to improve themselves. It shows that they're looking to improve themselves.
And I think that when you bring them on board, it's not like you're trying to bring on the 5-star recruit.
No, in many ways, you don't need it, right?
Like you're looking for the guy who's got good fundamentals that, like we talked about, has the couple core values that predict success in your company, right? And you're trying to be specific in their outcome, right? Not necessarily the work, but the result. Because you work in a dynamic business environment in which you don't do the same thing every day on repeat. Like most businesses aren't formulaic, right? Like stuff comes up or, hey, a huge initiative just changed or whatever. And so you need someone who can roll with the punches. You go specific with the result and broad with how or what. Because the truth is, and this is just my experience, is that the best defined job description leads to the perfect robot.
And there's people that give me my 7 tasks that I'm supposed to be responsible for. And for most of the time, those people don't work out in my world and the teams that I try to build. Because the reality is I want to empower the people to figure out the best way to do the job. They're doing it day in and day out. The way the job was done in 2017 is entirely different than the way most of these jobs are done in 2024.
Yep.
It's 2 entirely different things.
Different tools, different access to resources.
Right. As much as you try to take the current and project it forward, which is what you have to do.
Right.
The reality is all those things change up. And so what you want somebody that's willing to change and willing to roll with the punches and empower them to always figure out the best way to do the job, because ultimately that's what you want. Like I want the job done. Yes, I might have a good process for doing it, but that process needs to evolve over time and should evolve over time.
And you need people who are highly adaptable. Right? You can make a perfect robot, but what happens when an input comes in that they don't know how to handle?
Exactly.
They stop working.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they turn around and they stop until they get an answer from somebody.
Exactly.
Which is you. And so what ends up happening all day long is people turn to you to get all the answers that they need to do all the stuff. They go home fine at the end of the day and you go home drained.
Yeah.
Because you spent all day long solving everybody else's issue and everybody else's problem.
And don't get me wrong, right? Like there are certain positions that require formulaic and all that stuff. But in my mind, that's not marketing. Marketing isn't formulaic, right? It's highly adaptable. Like customers' behavior changes and customers change and the tools change. And
what you should be doing to reach them changes, right?
Exactly.
So even the parts of this business that are very procedural driven, right? Getting a copy package from somebody, getting it turned around and putting it out in the way you put it out, like all that can be very procedural driven. But if you turn it into that, then ultimately what happens is 3 years down the road, when the marketplace had changed, you're still doing the same damn thing because you're following a procedure instead of what the whole point is, which is to generate revenue for the business. That's the whole reason why you're doing all that other shit.
Yep. Do the same thing every time. You will get the same result every time.
Every time.
Until you don't.
We'll have a whole episode, hopefully here soon, on how we build webinars and stuff like that. But for me, just a general part of that is that for me, when you're doing a back-to-back webinar, whether it's a week apart, like used to do them every single week, right? You do 40 plus of them a year, or you're doing them monthly, doesn't really matter much. I tried to keep about 70% of the strategy the same and change 30% every time, literally just to change it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you get stuck in this is how we do it. This is what it looks like. And customers over time get tired of seeing the same damn thing.
Yep.
Right? You got to move their eyeballs around.
You want someone who has just enough experience that they know how they operate so they can figure out how they can operate in your business.
Exactly.
And then for us, looking for someone who's curious, who wants to learn, who wants to grow, someone who's competitive, who wants to win, who likes looking at success and then trying to figure out how to either replicate it or get better at it. And then someone who's a personality fit, unless you're an asshole and you like working with assholes, and that's okay, finding out the personality match for your business. I would say the higher up you go to hire, right? So like those are great for your entry mid-level people. And generally you want those people to rise up in the company because they already know the culture. They already know the numbers. They already know everything and they grow. But say you need to go out and you need to go find a CMO. You need to go find a senior marketer. And you're like, how do I know I'm hiring the right person for the result?
Yeah.
I would say like, for me, what I look for when I talk to them is, I feel like the number 3 is the magic number in marketing. And I look for 3 things. I look for 1, when they explain something and I ask them to clarify, do they speak with expertise and knowledge or do they simply reiterate, right? Because what you want them to be able to do is someone who's an expert can explain it to anyone. Someone who knows something can explain it to someone else who knows it, right? Because chances are you're hiring someone that has a gap of your skill set, right?
Exactly.
And so you want them to be able to explain it to you like you're 5 and make it make sense. And then number 2 is they should know every number that moves the needle. I heard someone once, they're like, the more numbers they give you, the more qualified they are. And I found that's a load of bullshit.
That is a load of crap.
But when they're able to use the, I call it the marketing ladder, where they give you the most important metrics. And then as they go down on what metrics impact those metrics, that shows excellency in moving the needle, right? Because not only do they know what the result is, they're showing you how they're going to get that result through numbers, right? Yep. Second is excellency through numbers. And then the third thing I look for is their ability to relate the outcome, like relate it in a way that makes it real. Can they apply that to your business today? And so you have a conversation, they have context of your business. You say, if you were trying to get that result in my business, what would you do? And they almost build you a game plan.
Yeah.
For their first 30, 90, 180, however many days.
Yeah, you definitely need a 90-day game plan.
So if they can communicate it so it's super easy to understand, because chances are they don't need to just convince you, they need to convince your team, right? Because they're coming in and they're trying to move a strategic ball forward. And if they got to pass that thing around, everyone else needs to know what the hell they're doing too. And then they need to know what numbers it impacts so that they know what outcomes they're looking for and they know how to get that outcome. And then they need to be able to tell you how they're going to do it. How are they going to score that touchdown?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, as you're going through that, I was just thinking about a conversation I had with a board. And they were asking me a bunch of questions. And I was talking marketing and sharing numbers and all that stuff that I normally do, right? The high level stuff. And, they started to try to apply some of it to, my job was to make it relate to them. Right. So as I'm sitting there going through like, this is what we saw, in trying to relate it to them, they're like, okay, well, that's weird, right? Like our business, our driving psychology, and I'm trying to talk in generalizations, driving psychology behind the business is the exact opposite. Like, how do we apply what you said? I'm like, no, that's not the point. Just because all these numbers and metrics and all this stuff worked here, it still has to get tweaked and applied differently in your business, right?
Yep.
Just like in the FinPub business, right? What it built at Legacy and the way it was built and what the metrics and the numbers were are different at every company.
Yeah. It's not how you'd go build a real estate company.
Exactly. Well, and even other financial publishing businesses, right? I would sit down and kind of start going through and people were like, oh, what's this metric? And what's that one? And well, there's some that are universal, like conversion rates. Our 90-day LTV and CPAs that we could pay against that were entirely different than them because we had a different product suite. We had a different monetization plan.
Right.
We had a different path of going down the path. And that's the challenge is everybody wants the magic number. Like, what's the magic number? No, you don't want the magic number. What you want is a bunch of friggin' thinkers, right? Yeah. You want a guy that can take all that shit, everything that you say, and either that person needs to be able to twist it around so you understand it, or you need to be able to twist what they're saying around and apply it into your company.
Yep.
That's where the money's at. Early on, at Legacy, everybody wanted to control the data. Then they wanted to release the data. And I had to keep telling guys, I'm like, look, there's no money in the data, right? The money is in your intelligence of what the data says, right? That's where you provide value. Being the only one who knows how to fill out an Excel file and hold on to all the metrics, that doesn't help anybody. Share that shit with everybody under the sun, right? Then step in and use your high-level brain and say, hey, this is what that means, and this is what we can do about it.
Yeah.
The value is in the intelligence behind the data.
Yeah. The other thing that really I look for when either I'm looking to raise up someone internally or I'm looking to go out and hire the stud, right, is like you need to be able to use the same lingo, the same language, right? Because every company has a language. Every company has almost a dictionary of terms. And, you know, when you're in a company and you say, hey, here's the numbers we're going to use, and someone else starts throwing out another number as like what they start optimizing or working for, you're like, that person's working directly against what you're doing. And the thing is, you know, they could be like, well, it's just these two numbers combined that I'm optimizing for. You're like, great. Then report on how it's impacting those two numbers separately, because that's the playbook everyone's working off of. If you go and you say, all right, you know, hey, we're going to be a passing football team. And then you get in the huddle and you're like, all right, well, what about this like run play? It's like, hey, we're a passing football team. Like if you can relate that into how that helps us become a better passing football team, great. But you can't just insert a running play because that's what you know.
Exactly.
Right. And that's what happens too many times is, especially if you're listening to this and you're a senior marketer and you're trying to figure out like, why don't I last long at places or why don't I get hired? You're probably trying to brute force your lingo into their company, and no business owner likes that.
It's such a great point, Cody, that you just brought up. At Legacy, when we tried to bring somebody in at any level beyond just entry level, start into something, I had the same conversations with all of them. I said, number one, we were actually 7 companies in one. We weren't one company. So each company had its own unique aspects and you had to figure them all out. And you're not just going to figure that out in a day or a week, right? It took time. And when you hire super smart people that are used to contributing at a high level, the one most frustrating thing for them is that they're not contributing at the level they think they should be. And so I always told everybody, hey, this business takes a little longer to learn. Give yourself some grace, right? I'm not saying don't learn it and don't haul ass on it, but don't beat yourself up if you don't know everything at the end of a week. But the second thing is, I said, look, you're being hired because you got a ton of experience outside of here. That's great, right? Bottle that up and step in and learn how we do it. Look at the way it's being done here. Because clearly, you know, there's lots of things that I disagreed with when I first got here. You know, when I got there, the company had made $70 million. I'm like, they figured out how to grow a $70 million company, right? That's 1/10 of 1% of all companies in the country.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately we got that up over 400, but the reality is they figured out, they've been in business a long time. They figured out how to build a $70 million company. Why don't you just see if you can learn something from them first, step in and figure out how they're doing it, and then take your expertise and apply it in and twist it in. Spend 90% of the time doing it their way and 10% on your way.
And take information in. You might just be better. You might just be better for you. You might be more efficient. You might be able to find a path that works a little bit better for you, for the business, and for the team around you. You know, if you're a business owner, at the end of the day, you're hiring people, not positions.
Exactly.
Right? You're not hiring robots, you're hiring people.
Yep.
And you have to be able to be dynamic, because if you want a one-size-fits-all hat and you want them to wear that, it may be loose and it may be too snug and you're going to be frustrated with the outcome. I can almost guarantee it. And if you can tailor your company to be to where you hire people, not positions, your marketing team will go a lot faster in a lot more directions just through putting people in a position to win.
Obviously, we'll have to have a part 2 to this thing because developing a team is entirely different than just bringing them in. But back on the hiring part, right? I've heard it over and over again all throughout the years, and it's such a catchphrase and it's such bullshit, right? It's the hire slow, fire fast mentality, right? And I think that's a load of shit, right? Do a one-step hiring process, right? You should have a multi-step hiring process and you should have things that must occur. Like in my case, when we had 2 managers on the first interview, they both had to agree before they went to a second interview. And if they disagreed for whatever reason, they had to clarify what they disagreed about and then bring that person back in for another first interview and only cover those clarification things. That's how you get rid of the guy like, hey, I don't want to hire him because I'm threatened. He has to specifically say what bothered him during this interview, and then that person gets a chance to solve it. But to me, if you've gone to all the energy to find that body, all the core values that you have, your second interview really has to be a lot about them figuring out if they're a good fit for your company. When you figured out all that stuff, then it's your job to put them into the company and then try to find the best spot for them. What you said, right? You're not hiring bodies, right? You're hiring people. So that person, if they have all the character traits that you want and they get in and maybe they're not great at Excel, but maybe they're great at another piece of your business that you can slide them into, right? Ultimately, as you started through that process and, if they've got all the character traits, they're going to latch on to something that they're really good at, and we had a high success rate at Legacy because of that. And then ultimately, when you do get to that point, right, and you figured out they're not working out, and you've given them grace and you try to find the right home for them, that's when you get rid of them. But this concept and idea of hire slow and fire fast is just such a bullshit concept. And the problem is it destroys the morale internally on your team when you go through that entire thing and then you start jettisoning people without giving people a fair chance. Then nobody else will make a decision because they get fearful. A fearful team isn't empowered and doesn't generate the high level shit that you need.
Yep. You're 100% right. And your team, when people start coming on board, they don't respect anyone new to the team because they're like, are they going to be here?
Exactly.
And is it worth it? And those people are not set up for success. You couldn't be more right.
Yep. In any place, if you present yourself well, right? If you're articulate and you're not an asshole and you have that willingness to learn, like those character traits in general, they'll get you jobs anywhere.
Yep.
Like they'll get you places anywhere. It's a harder time right now at this stage turning down opportunities than finding them. And because your reputation starts to stack upon itself. When you go through and you're trying to hire somebody to senior level stuff, right? Look at their track record. At this stage of the game, they got to have a track record and look at their track record of success and believe it.
Yeah.
Because the reality is they're showing you exactly who they are, right? Do they have that ability to communicate and take big concepts and dumb them down, quote unquote, dumb them down, like make them relatable is what you said, right? Do they have that ability to do that? They will have showed it somewhere else along the way and find those things. It takes longer to develop from within, but man, you get much better people.
Yep. And you get a lot less bullshit of like people coming in and interjecting their flavor. Couldn't agree more. Well, I hope you got some value out of this, whether you're a business owner, whether you're a marketer and you're looking how to get into the industry, or you're a senior marketer and you're looking on how to move up or go find that role that, is perfect for you. I think there was something here. I guess that's it today.
Okay.
Good luck out there. Go make some money. You've been listening to Marketing from the Edge podcast. If you want to hear more of our thoughts every week, visit marketingedgepod.com. We'll share more of our very best lessons, thoughts, strategies for growing a business, as well as some personal stories here from the edge of the world. Invest a couple minutes of your morning and we'll give you the blueprint to growing your business from where it's at today to where you want it to be. That's marketingedgepod.com. If you want to reach out to us directly, feel free to email cody@marketingedgepod.com and you might get a surprise bonus. Next week, we want to give you the 3 numbers John plans on using to grow his business from $0 to $100 million in annual revenue. These are the 3 numbers you need to know. Knowing this will scale your business from where you're at today to where you want to be. We'll reveal what the 3 numbers are, what they mean, how to find them, and why they're the 3 most important numbers we look at every day. If you're looking to make your first million or try to make 100 million, these are the 3 numbers we'd use to get there.